Hey there, my new semester has already started, but the finals are still far enough away from me to obsess over old machinery. So here I am, back at it again with another ship. And of course, another quiz. Okay, so picture this. You're in Central Africa on the coast of the great Lake Tanganyika. To be precise, you're in a small fishing village that has neither road or rail leading to it. Its only connection to the outside world is a steamer built by the Imperial German Navy that now functions as sort of a swimming bazaar. This ship comes round every 2 weeks or so and stops outside this little isolated village to trade with the people there. Now, I want you to choose when do you think the situation I just described took place? Yeah, well, it was a trick question again. All the answers, obviously, are correct. But an over 100-year-old German steamer in a landlocked lake in the middle of Africa sounds a bit too surreal to be true. I know, but it is. This is the story of the last ship of the Kaiser's flotilla. Uh, that's still going. The MV Liemba, or originally the SMS Graf von Götzen. Now, to start this off, if you didn't know, this is Lake Tanganyika. And yeah, you're correct, there's no way a ship this large could get there from Germany on its own. But that's what railroads are for. And you'd be correct, but I have to burst your bubble because it's 1913 and not even the railroad is finished. Okay, I think this needs some backup information. It's the early 20th century, and the German imperial state decides that, because they had a colony in Africa with a sizable lake, that it'd be quite useful to have a steamer on there, for transports and such. A reasonable idea. They commissioned the Meyerwerft to build a 1,200-ton heavy steamer for this lake. They followed order, and on the 1st of April 1912, the ship, then named Götzen, floated for the first time in Kiel. Now for the interesting part, the shipping. The Götzen was disassembled, again, and packaged into 5,000 crates that then got shipped to Dar es Salaam via train and steamer. Just 3 German engineers accompanied the 5,000 crates. Once arrived in Dar es Salaam, these 3 German engineers hired around 250 locals to rebuild the ship under their supervision. Most of these locals have never before seen such large quantities of steel before. They took the train as far as the rails had been completed and then had to carry the 5,000 heavy crates by hand until they reached the lake. A year later, they finished the ship on the 5th of February 1915. By then, as you may know, the First World War had started, and the German Navy was interested in transforming the Götzen into a makeshift warship, as Great Britain and Belgium also had colonies on that same lake. So, similar to my last video, go watch that if you haven't, by the way, they just added a lot of guns to the Götzen and slapped an SMS in front of her name to make it official. To be precise, they put on one 10.5cm cannon, one 8.8cm cannon, both yoinked from the light cruiser Königsberg, and 2 37mm Hotchkiss revolving cannons from the Möwe. Now, for there to be somewhat of a battle for the lake, there have to be more ships than just the Götzen. Duh, I know. Early 1915, the British Admiralty decided that it is the duty of the Navy to attack the enemy wherever there is enough water to float a ship. This included Lake Tanganyika. So the British decided on 2 fast gunboats to be sent to the lake. They were to get there by train, but the British had the same problem as the Germans, as their train line didn't reach the lake yet. So they had to carry the boats over land as well. Leading the expedition was Geoffrey Spicer Simpson, a very, let's say, interesting person. Give his Wikipedia article a read, it's actually quite interesting. Going back to the British gunboats, they were more like yachts rather than warships, both roughly 13 meters long and with way too strong engines, and both equipped with a large cannon at their stern. Maybe too large of a cannon, as during the first test shot of one of the gunboats back in Britain, the recoil tore the gun straight from the deck and threw it into the Thames, alongside with its gunner. Geoffrey Spicer wanted to name the 2 gunboats Cat and Dog, but the Admiralty, what a surprise, didn't like that. So he decided to call them Mimi and Toutou, which are French colloquial words for cat and dog respectively. The Admiralty didn't notice. Just like the Germans, the British shipped the boats on a steamer to Africa, then further by rail, and after that had to go on by foot. After 3 months of being harassed by mosquitoes and carrying 2 boats over African mountains, the British reached the shore of the lake. By this time, the Germans had the Götzen already completed. Actually, the Germans had smaller ships on the lake beforehand, the Kingani and the Hedwig von Wissmann, but both were rather small, smaller than Mimi and Toutou anyhow, so they didn't really make a difference. Then, a spy told the Germans about the British carrying 2 ships over the mountains to Albertville. But the Germans didn't believe them. They thought it to be impossible, but the Germans did send the Kingani to take a look at Albertville. On the 25th of December of 1915, the Kingani steamed past Albertville, and to the Germans' disbelief, 2 British gunboats dashed forward, hoping to intercept the Kingani. The Kingani tried to flee, but Mimi and Toutou's engines were too powerful. Soon, the British had caught up with the German ship and opened fire. The commanding officer of the German Kingani got hit directly by one of the cannon shots from Mimi, and soon after, the Kingani surrendered. The British repaired the Kingani and added her to their fleet, naming her Fifi. Not long after, the second small boat of the Germans, the Hedwig von Wissmann, passed Albertville on the search for the missing Kingani. Again, Mimi and Toutou pushed their engines, trying to reach the German ship as fast as possible. The German ship again tried to flee, eventually even shot back, but just shortly after, the cannons of Mimi and Toutou tore the German ship to pieces. Spicer, the leader of the British expedition, was ecstatic. As far as he knew, his 2 gunboats now ruled over the lake. The British had no idea of the 1,200-ton colossus the Germans had built. Again, just days after the sinking of the Hedwig von Wissmann, Spicer's scouts told him they spotted another ship heading towards Albertville, but this time it was different. Spicer downplayed his scouts until he saw it himself. A huge grey shadow emerged within the bay, 150 times heavier than Mimi and Toutou. Such a large ship couldn't be here, impossible. But there it was. A battleship cannon proudly stood at the bow, smaller cannons rotated at the stern. Above it flew a giant Imperial war flag like a carpet. The SMS Götzen had arrived. After Spicer realized what he had to face this time, he lowered his binoculars and silently went into his cabin. Spicer knew that just one of the shells from the Götzen would disintegrate Mimi and Toutou. Now, the Götzen was the unchallenged queen of the lake. She dominated the water, and Mimi and Toutou would never leave their port again. Sadly, the fate of these 2 gunboats is unknown. The Germans now ruled over the lake. But on land, the British and Belgian forces continued to advance. When in mid-1916 the fortress Bismarcksburg, south of Lake Tanganyika fell, and the Götzen had been attacked multiple times by Belgian planes anyway, the order to self-sink the ship was given. She was not to fall into enemy hands. But the German engineers didn't want to destroy their own ship. So they heavily greased everything to conserve it as best as possible, and then, not far from Kigoma, they opened the sea valves. The Götzen's rule was over as she sank to the bottom of the lake. It's roughly the middle of 1918, and Kigoma is now under Belgian control. They call for a Swede, Johann Ludwig Wall, to raise the Götzen from the lake bed where she then sat. Wall succeeded in lifting the ship 1.5 meter using a 375-ton heavy crane and a multitude of empty barrels. With the ship floating, they carried it into the port of Kigoma and for an entire year tried to resurface the Götzen. At the end of 1919, the Belgians gave up and towed the semi-swimming Götzen to Point Duzana to let her sink once again. Then, 2 years later, Kigoma was transferred to the British. They again made a plan to resurface the Götzen, and after 3 full years of trying, they finally succeeded. On the 16th of March 1924, the Götzen, after sitting submerged for 8 long years, was finally back and floating on her own. The British expected the ship to be in an awful state and with many repairs needed, but to their surprise, every vital machine and mechanical component was so thickly covered in grease that they had no contact with water at all. After removing the grease, the machines sprung to life as if the Götzen had never sunk. Exactly 2 months after being lifted from the lake bed, the British reinstated the Götzen under a new name, the Liemba. For many years, she then served as a passenger liner under the Tanganyika Railways and Port Service. Every year they repainted a part of her hull until years later she no longer had her military grey color, but was steadily becoming more and more white. In 1945, after being in use for 23 years, the Liemba was so run down that extensive repairs needed to be done. For 3 years, the Liemba was retrofitted with better engines and generally modernized until in 1948 the East African Railways and Harbour Administration took her on. They then further used her as a cargo and passenger liner. In 1951 they expanded one of the decks and installed 2 cranes. The once warship could now carry up to 230 passengers. On the 5th of January 1954, the Liemba nearly sunk again, as she was hauling 2 freight boats through a storm. The chief engineer managed to save the Liemba by cutting the ropes to the already sinking freight boats in the last second. 1961 and Tanganyika just gained independence, and a few weeks later the Liemba as well was given to the natives. Just a year later, in 1962, the Liemba would play a vital role in evacuating refugees fleeing from the civil war in the Congo. In 1976 to 1978, the Liemba got upgraded by installing 2 powerful diesel engines and installing further decks for passenger transport. While still carrying passengers across the lake on a day-to-day basis, she was completely overhauled in 1993 by a Danish charity foundation realizing just how important the Liemba was. In 1997, the Liemba officially became the oldest still running ferry in the world. In this time, again, she got regularly chartered by the United Nations Refugee Agency to carry refugees away from war. In 2015, the United Nations again chartered a ship to carry refugees. Doing this, it became apparent that the ship was in a very bad state of disrepair, and that something needed to be done. 3 years later, in 2018, she then was deemed too unsafe to further carry passengers, and was therefore put in a dry dock. Repairs were not carried out due to a serious lack of funding. Most thought the incredible journey of this ship was probably gonna end there until just half a year ago, on the 23rd of November 2023, the shipping company that owns the Liemba announced that the ship was to undergo extensive repairs in a deal valued at roughly $8.3 million. All in all, the Götzen, or later Liemba, was and is a ship with an extraordinary voyage. The voyage starts at being carried through the jungle in boxes by African natives, then goes on to ruling over the lake as the sole undisputed battleship, to sinking twice and then against all odds going on as a passenger liner for nearly 100 further years, and saving an incredible amount of people from a multitude of civil wars across mid-Africa. She is the only ship of the German Imperial Navy that's still floating and operating, and therefore often righteously called the Queen of Lake Tanganyika. Well, I hope you liked this video, and I'm sorry it took me so long. Well, you know the drill. Follow me or drop a like if you like these kind of videos, and hopefully I see you again in the next one that, if all goes well, shouldn't take me as long as this one. Anyway, thank you for watching.